Welcome to the worst writer in the world.
Hooray!
Except this episode isn't actually the worst writer in the world.
Oh, really? What is it?
Well, you see, what we've done is every now and again, every few years, we get bored and decide to start a whole new podcast.
Yeah.
And we've done that again. This one is called The Complete History and Fistory of Underspace, and it's available right now from the British Comedy Guide.
Brilliant.
And the most exciting part, perhaps for listeners to this show, is that it's a Grett Binchleaf story.
Hooray!
And so instead of doing a worst writer episode this time, we're going to listen to the first episode of that podcast.
Brilliant.
So let's get started with The Complete History and Fistory of Underspace by Rufus and Howard.
Once upon a time, there was a girl called Henrietta who found a doorway to another world.
Chapter 1. The Greenhouse on the Roof. Come to the roof, you won't believe what I found up here. Henrietta stared at the message on her phone. There were only a few minutes before the bell for the end of lunch, and Lena wanted her to climb 4 flights of stairs to the roof. Found what? Henrietta typed back. You have to see it, come now. Henrietta glanced up at the corridor, at all the kids who weren't going to be late for class, then made her way to the winding staircase that led up to the roof. We're going to get in so much trouble for this, said Henrietta, as she stepped out onto the flat roof of St. Alan's School for Children, and the icy wind whipped her hair into her eyes. It'll be worth it, said Lena, bouncing up and down on her heels with excitement. Look at this! As far as Henrietta could tell, there were 3 noteworthy things on the roof. There was an old greenhouse, which was packed full of leafy plants. There was an abandoned biology class skeleton, which was wearing a thick woolen coat. And there was a tree which was growing on the roof of a school, as if that were a perfectly normal thing for a tree to do. Lena, for some reason, was interested in the greenhouse. It's a greenhouse, said Henrietta, as she ignored it and wandered over to the tree and the coat-wearing skeleton. The skeleton was hanging from a metal frame, with its head drooped forwards. As Henrietta got closer, she noticed that someone had written the name Steve on the front of its skull, using a thick black marker pen. It's a greenhouse that glows, said Lena. So someone left the light on. Henrietta turned her attention to the spidery branches of the tree. She'd never seen a full-sized tree growing from the roof of a building before, especially the roof of a 4-story building in the middle of London. But it's so bright, said Lena. Why is it so bright? Henrietta had to admit, the greenhouse was glowing a lot. It shone up into the tree's bare branches and cast a halo of light onto the concrete roof. Too bright to be a simple bulb, it was as though one of the floodlights from the playing field was in there, as though there was a little sun inside. Maybe it's a special lamp to help the plants grow. And why is the door locked? Said Lena. To stop the plants escaping? What are you talking about? Every kidnapper needs a place to put their victims, said Lena, as she put her ear up to the greenhouse and tapped on the glass with a fingernail. Hello, she called. Can anybody hear me? You think there's 8 kids locked in there, said Henrietta. The greenhouse was packed with leafy plants, and its door was covered in thick white paint. It was impossible to see what was inside, but Henrietta doubted it was 8 children. It's 9 now, said Lena. 9 kids have disappeared. They didn't disappear, they just changed schools. That's what the kidnapper wants you to think, said Lena. That's how they get away with it. A gust of wind blew Henrietta's hair over her face and made her shiver with cold. She reached into her pocket for a band and forced her mass of curls into an untidy ponytail. Who would kidnap school kids and lock them in a greenhouse? I figured that out, said Lena, almost jumping up and down with excitement. It's Miss Clarkson. The headmaster's secretary? I've seen her coming up here loads of times, and she brings water to give to her prisoners, but no food because she's evil. Or maybe she's watering the plants, thought Henrietta, but she didn't say anything. She'd only known Lena for a few weeks, but in that time they'd already grown close. From the moment Henrietta arrived at St. Alan's School for Children, Lena made her feel welcome, like she belonged, even though they both knew that she didn't. More importantly, Henrietta liked Lena, so Henrietta didn't argue. She didn't call Lena ridiculous. She simply said, "Come on, let's go. It's too cold up here." Lena pulled her face away from the glass and flashed one of her big, honest smiles at Henrietta. "Why don't you put the skeleton's coat on?" she said. Henrietta glanced over at the grinning skeleton with the name written on its forehead. "I'm not going to steal a coat from a skeleton," said Henrietta. "Go on, it'll suit you," said Lena. "It's scruffy, like you." "Thanks. I'll get it for you." Lena scurried over to Steve the skeleton and began tugging at the coat awkwardly. She pulled at the sleeves, making the skeleton's plastic bones rattle together and its jaw bounce up and down as if it was silently speaking. "Careful," said Henrietta. "You'll break it." "Don't worry," said Lena. But Henrietta couldn't help it. Lena was one of the clumsiest people she had ever met. Every time Lena stood up, she knocked her chair over, and she couldn't turn around without bumping into a table or tripping over someone's bag. Lena moved like she wasn't used to the shape of her own body, and kept finding bits of it in unexpected places. "It's just an old skeleton anyway," said Lena, still failing to get the coat off its shoulders. "Cheeky," said the skeleton. Lena gave the coat a mighty tug. Steve the skeleton lurched forwards, then backwards, then his head came loose and fell away, over the edge of the roof, and plummeted 4 stories to the ground. Henrietta stared, at Lena's back, at the headless skeleton. She could swear she'd heard it speak, through the fluttering wind and rattling bones. As its jaw jerked open and closed, she'd heard the skeleton speak. "Sorry," said Lena. "It was an accident. I didn't mean to." Lena had been closer to the skeleton, almost wrestling with it. Lena would have heard if the skeleton had spoken, but Lena was acting like nothing out of the ordinary had happened. Besides, plastic skeletons couldn't speak. Henrietta had obviously imagined it. "It wasn't your fault," said Henrietta, putting her hand on Lena's wrist and squeezing gently. Lena didn't like being hugged and tended to jump away from people who tried to wrap their arms around her. Henrietta had quickly learned other ways of showing affection. "But we should go," Henrietta added. "Someone might have heard. Or got hit by a falling skull," she thought. Henrietta linked her arm around Lena's, and they began to walk across the roof towards the door which led back into the school. They had barely moved 2 steps when they were stopped, dead in their tracks, by a rattling sound from the greenhouse. They snapped their heads round to look, but the door was still closed. The greenhouse stood, quietly, unmoving. Then it happened again, a loud rattling of metal against metal, but this time they saw what was causing it. It was the door handle to the greenhouse, moving up and down as someone tried to open the locked door from inside. "Someone's in there," said Lena, a little too loudly. "I told you, what did I say?" There was a loud bang against the door, and Lena gave a high-pitched squeak of surprise. Several more bangs followed as the person inside the greenhouse beat their fists against the painted glass of the door, so loud Henrietta felt certain it would crack. "Open the door!" shouted an impatient voice. "Come on, I haven't got all day. What do I pay you for?" Henrietta and Lena exchanged a nervous glance. "It's Miss Clarkson," Lena hissed. Henrietta had to admit that piercing nasal voice did sound like the headmaster's secretary. "Don't make me search for my own key," shouted the voice. "You know I hate searching through my pockets. I never know what I might find in there." The person inside the greenhouse stopped shouting and went back to punching the door, louder and more insistent. The greenhouse shuddered and trembled with the force, and Henrietta pulled Lena away, back and behind the trunk of the apple tree where they couldn't be seen. She motioned at Lena to stay silent. "Right, that's it," shouted the voice from inside the greenhouse. "I'm looking for my key. I'm looking for it. Hang on, what's this? How long has this cheese been in my pocket? It's gone green. Oh well, better keep it. Might get peckish later. Aha, here's the stupid key. You're in trouble now." Henrietta heard the greenhouse lock turn and click. Then the door swung open. Heavy footsteps began clumping around the roof, and Henrietta felt Lena's hand grab hers. Whoever had been inside the greenhouse was obviously searching for their accomplice, the person who was supposed to unlock the door. Sooner or later, they were bound to look behind the tree. "Where's your head gone?" said the irritated voice. "Honestly, I'll leave you alone for 5 minutes and you've lost your head again." Henrietta knew the best thing she could do was stay quiet and stay still, but those were two things Henrietta wasn't good at. She was constantly getting in trouble for talking or fidgeting or simply standing up and leaving when she got bored. So, although she knew it was the worst thing she could do, Henrietta leaned slowly around the trunk of the tree, further and further, until she could see the front of the greenhouse and the large woman standing by the open door. "How many times has this happened now?" said the woman. "If you can't look after your head, you shan't be allowed to have one." Lena had been right. It was Miss Claxon, the headmaster's terrifying secretary, a woman who seemed to hate her job, children, and the headmaster in equal measures. She was standing right outside the greenhouse, adjusting her overly large hairstyle. Steve the skeleton was dangling beside her, and she appeared to have forgotten about searching for her accomplice. Henrietta moved back behind the tree and whispered to Lena, "It's Miss Claxon." "I knew it!" Lena hissed back. "She's talking to the skeleton," said Henrietta. "Maybe she thinks it's going to reply," Lena giggled. "Yeah," said Henrietta flatly. "What kind of person thinks skeletons can talk?" "This is the last time," they heard Miss Claxon say as she fumbled to lock the greenhouse door. "This is the last time I'm going to search all around the school and in the bushes for your stupid head. If you lose it again, no head for you." Henrietta and Lena listened as Miss Claxon's footsteps clacked across the concrete. The door back into the school creaked open, then closed. There was a thud and a click, and they were once again alone on the roof. Henrietta breathed for what felt like the first time in minutes. "See? Told you," said Lena as they walked out onto the empty rooftop. "Miss Claxon's kidnapping kids and locking them in the greenhouse. Proof." "No, it isn't." "Then why did she lock herself in the greenhouse?" "She probably locked it by accident," said Henrietta. Lena stepped up to the greenhouse door and tried the handle. "Can you hear me in there?" she called. "Knock once for yes and twice for no." It certainly was strange that Miss Claxon had been locked in a greenhouse on the roof, but that didn't mean Lena's impossible ideas were true. There wasn't enough space for 9 kids in that greenhouse. No one answered when they knocked on the glass. And it was simply ridiculous to think that the headmaster's secretary was imprisoning children in a greenhouse. "Come on, we're late for rehearsal," said Henrietta. "Hey, maybe Mr. Capaldi will say we're irresponsible and so we can't be in the play anymore." "Hope so," said Henrietta, and they crept through the door which led back into the school where children definitely weren't being kidnapped. Henrietta was sure about that. She had no doubt. She was completely convinced. She was totally positive. She was 100% certain. Well, almost. Chapter 2. St. Alan's School for Disappearing Children. St. Alan's School for Children was a fairly ordinary school, but there was one fact that made it stand out. It had a tree growing in it. The tree's base took up a large part of the central atrium, and its trunk thrust 4 stories up, then poked its head out of a hole in the roof. Its branches stuck out in all directions, making their ways through walls and classrooms to escape the darkness and reach the sunlight. St. Alan's was an old school that had been built around an even older tree, and the holes in the walls and floors were widened regularly as the tree grew taller and fatter. Henrietta and Lena ran down the spiral staircase which wound around the trunk of the mighty tree, their footsteps echoing through the central chamber and deserted corridors. They kept their hands on the outer banister as they descended, and Henrietta repeatedly glanced over her shoulder to check Lena wasn't about to trip and fall on top of her. They hit the ground floor and headed for the arts corridor. They passed a cabinet of old trophies and a row of flags, and the carved wooden school sign which overlooked the main entrance. Once, long ago, it had said, "Welcome to St. Alan's International School for Boys." Then, at some point, the words "and girls" had been added. Eventually, boys and girls had been covered by the more accurate children. They pushed open the heavy door to the theatre and burst in to find most of the cast already in costume. "Lena, Henrietta," said Mr. Capadia, the drama teacher, "do you realise how late you are?" Henrietta pulled the band from her hair and shook the curly mess free. 10 minutes, she said. 12 minutes, Mr. Capadia corrected. "Everyone else is in costume. We were about to start without you." Mr. Capadia waved a hand at the other children in their mismatched outfits. He'd made the mistake of allowing the cast to choose or create their own costumes. Consequently, the stage currently contained a girl in a wedding dress, another in a pirate costume, 3 boys dressed as firefighters, 2 wearing bicycle helmets, and Tiny Malcolm, who was dressed as a giant crab. The play they were rehearsing was Snow White and the 7 Dwarfs, a story which was famous for including no pirates, no firefighters, and absolutely no massive crabs. "Sorry, sir," Henrietta and Lena said together. "Never mind, you can get into costume while the rest of us practice scene 9. Mr. Capadia picked up his mug of coffee and shuffled over to the front of the stage. "Now, gather round, please. I have bad news," he said, then pulled a handkerchief from his shirt pocket and used it to dab imaginary sweat from his forehead. "Mo won't be acting in the play anymore." A murmur passed around the group. Henrietta felt Lena's hand gripping her wrist. "Why not?" asked Tiny Malcolm, his many crab legs trembling as he spoke. "He moved schools, or got a chronic illness, I forget which." Mr. Capadia waved his hand dismissively. "Which means we are now missing 1 dwarf, so I'm changing the name of the play to Snow White and the 6 Dwarfs." Mr. Capadia gave a heavy sigh, furrowed his bushy eyebrows and shook his head sadly. "The rest of you, take your positions on the stage for scene 9, he said. "And let's all try not to be completely awful today, shall we?" The stage was lit with a single spotlight, illuminating a dining table surrounded by chairs. Snow White and the 6 Dwarfs took their seats around it, while Henrietta and Lena climbed the stairs to sit in the back row, in the darkness and as far away from Mr. Capadia as possible. "Mo was in registration this morning," said Lena, as she tapped a quick message into her phone. "Why would he leave without saying goodbye?" "We could check his dorm," said Henrietta. "Maybe he's just sick or something." Lena and Mo were boarders, meaning they both lived in the school full time. Henrietta had to go home at the end of each school day and always felt a little jealous of those who got to stay. "You see, I told you something's going on," said Lena, as she tapped message after message into her phone. "Maybe Mr. Capadia got Mo mixed up with someone else." "Then why isn't he answering?" Lena waggled her phone in Henrietta's face, making her blink against the sudden light. "Give him a chance." "This is not normal," said Lena. "How many people have left school in the last 2 weeks?" "I don't know now. 10? "And did any of them say goodbye?" Henrietta shrugged. "I didn't really know them," she said. "I did, and they all disappeared without a word. Mo's my friend, he wouldn't do that." Henrietta nodded. She'd only been at the school for a few weeks. She had to take Lena's word for what was and wasn't normal. "And have you noticed, they all left for odd reasons," said Lena. "Like Derek." "I thought his family went to live somewhere else." "Yeah, on the International Space Station." "Well, people do live up there," said Henrietta. "At my old school, we watched videos of them floating around and brushing their teeth." "They don't take their kids," said Lena. "Astronauts aren't allowed to take their whole family and their pet dog." Henrietta laughed, impulsively covering her mouth with her hand. "Those videos would be more interesting if they had floating dogs in them." "And what about Susan?" said Lena. "I think she got a scholarship somewhere." "To Oxford University." "So?" "She's 12 years old," said Lena. "The teachers are lying to us because they don't want us to know the truth, because Miss Claxon is kidnapping kids and selling them. I bet the headmaster's involved as well. There's something odd about him. I always thought so." "Wouldn't someone notice if kids were disappearing? What about their parents?" "They were all boarders. We don't see our parents for weeks, months sometimes." St. Alan's was an international school for kids from all over the world. Its pupils were the children of diplomats and journalists and pilots. And while the day kids and half-boarders had families living in or around London, many full-boarders were hundreds or thousands of miles away from their nearest relative. Everyone who left was a boarder, said Henrietta, grabbing a handful of her hair and twisting it between her fingers anxiously. Yes, but you're a boarder. I know, Lena almost shouted, and I don't want Miss Claxon to put me in a bag and sell me. Mr. Kapadia turned in their general direction and held a hand above his eyes to shield them from the spotlight's glare. On the stage, the scene still hadn't started because tiny Malcolm kept falling out of his seat, then getting stuck lying on his back with his many crab legs pointing up in the air. They waited silently for Mr. Kapadia to return his attention to the stage. Then Henrietta whispered, "Why did Malcolm make a giant crab costume instead of a dwarf?" "He said it was his dad's idea," said Lena, "because Malcolm's playing Grumpy, and another word for grumpy is crabby." Henrietta laughed. Mr. Kapadia twisted round with another furious squint. "Do you think he'll change the name of the play again?" Henrietta said, without moving her lips. "Snow White and the 5 Dwarfs and 1 Massive Crab?" Lena let out a high-pitched giggle, then slapped her hand over her mouth. But it was too late. Mr. Kapadia turned and shouted, "Right, that's it. I'm making a note of this." He stalked over to his table by the seating bank and rifled through several piles of paper until he found the one he needed. "I'm putting a black mark against both your names," said Mr. Kapadia, scribbling on his register. "And you know what that means." Henrietta didn't have a clue what that meant. "Henrietta, are you aware you're still not on my register?" said Mr. Kapadia. "How many times have I asked you to go and talk to the headmaster about this?" Henrietta stayed silent. She'd been hoping Mr. Kapadia would forget. "Since you two are just sitting there chatting and playing with your phones, perhaps you could go now." Lena quickly killed the light shining from her screen. "But, sir," said Henrietta. "Now, please, and don't come back without a new register that has your name printed clearly on it." Henrietta stood and began to walk reluctantly towards the exit. She knew from Mr. Kapadia's tone that the matter wasn't open for discussion. She simply had to go to the headmaster and ask him to put her name on the register, at which point the headmaster would notice that Henrietta's name was not on any school records whatsoever. Because Henrietta wasn't actually a student at St. Alan's School for Children. Henrietta wasn't supposed to be there. Thank you for listening to this episode of Not the Worst Writer in the World, hopefully. It's kind of a bit of a self-insult that we took our book that we spent such a long time writing and put the first 2 chapters on our show called The Worst Writer in the World. I feel like we're putting ourselves down there. But if you listened to that and you thought, you know what, these 2 aren't actually the worst writers in the world, they're okay, and I wouldn't mind listening to a bit more by them. Well, you can right now by searching for The Complete History and Fistory of Underspace, or by going to the British Comedy Guide and finding it there.
Listen, you are listening to this in your podcast app. Just type the word Fistory and you'll probably find it.
That is definitely one way of doing it. I've done that, it's worked. If you have any problem finding it, just go to our website, manbycow.com, and there's links to all the different places where you can find it. Thanks for listening. Bye-bye, milk.
Bye-bye, milk.